What if I revealed to you that this oddly shaped aircraft is, in fact, NASA's most vital vehicle in disguise? Without its existence, humanity may have never stepped foot on the lunar surface. The International Space Station likely wouldn't exist. And even now, NASA still depends on this specific plane for some of its most critical operations. What you're witnessing is a largely unrecognized champion of the space race, a true engineering savior. In the mid-1960s, NASA was progressing rapidly, evolving from launching their first astronauts to preparing for a full-scale moon mission. To take such a monumental leap, the United States needed to begin constructing significantly larger rockets at unprecedented speed. Enter the Saturn V, a towering structure the height of a skyscraper and as wide as a typical home, ranking among the largest flying machines ever engineered. Its massive size was essential to achieve its objective, landing people on the moon. However, this also introduced a serious logistical dilemma. This marvel of Cold War-era aerospace design required an immense collaborative manufacturing effort across the nation. The first stage booster of the Saturn V was assembled by Boeing in a suburb of New Orleans named Michoud. Since that's located just across the bay from Florida, where NASA's main launch facility at Cape Canaveral was established, transporting the first stage by sea was relatively straightforward. But Saturn V wasn't a single-stage rocket, it had 3 stages. And the second and third stages, they were being manufactured far across the country in California, adding major complications. The second stage came from North American Aviation in Seal Beach, while the third stage was being put together by the Douglas Aircraft Company in Santa Monica. On top of that, the rocket's instrument unit, a massive ring-shaped module housing all navigation and control systems, was built in the landlocked city of Huntsville, Alabama. With a diameter of 10 meters or roughly 33 feet, transporting these fully assembled parts overland using trucks or trains was impossible. The only alternative NASA had to move the second and third stages from the west coast of Florida was by sea, an extended 20-day journey that involved sailing down past Mexico, navigating through the Panama Canal, and looping back around the Gulf, all at a substantial financial cost. During this high-stakes era of the space race against the USSR, NASA was desperate for a better transportation method. Enter the Boeing 377 Stratocruiser. First taking flight in 1947, it was among the earliest large commercial aircraft. With the ability to carry around 100 passengers halfway around the globe, it offered a level of in-flight comfort that would make today's travelers envious. But by the 1960s, this propeller-driven aircraft was being retired in favor of newer jet-powered airliners like the Boeing 747. That left a fleet of massive airplanes sitting idle, waiting to be repurposed. And guess what? This is where the story gets fun. Man by the name of John Conroy, quite the fascinating character. He studied engineering in Oklahoma before catching a train to Hollywood, where he pursued acting between 1937 and 1940. Eventually, he boarded a ship bound for Hawaii, where he learned to pilot airplanes. On December 7, 1941, Conroy happened to be working as a civilian at Pearl Harbor when it was bombed by Japanese forces. Immediately following the attack, he enlisted in the U.S. Air Force. He was soon stationed in the North Atlantic, where he commanded a B-17 bomber through 19 combat sorties. In November of 1944, his plane was shot down over German territory. He was captured, held as a prisoner of war in a Nazi camp, and remained there until the war ended. After the war, Conroy continued flying under the U.S. Army's wing, but he had bigger ambitions. One evening, during dinner with a friend named Lee Mansdorf, the topic turned to NASA's major struggle, transporting enormous rocket boosters through the Panama Canal. Mansdorf happened to mention that he'd recently bought several decommissioned Boeing Stratocruiser planes, but didn't yet have a use for them. And that's when something clicked. Conroy had an idea. What if they took one of the Stratocruisers and dramatically extended its fuselage until it could fit a Saturn V rocket booster inside? They could then propose a direct airlift operation from California to Cape Canaveral. This marked the birth of a bold new company, Aerospace Lines. To begin the transformation of the Stratocruiser from a luxury passenger plane into a rocket transport aircraft, the team started by slicing the airframe in two just behind its wings. They gutted everything inside to create a massive empty chamber. Next, they removed the middle segment from a second Stratocruiser and inserted it into the first plane's frame to stretch its length. Then, to increase cargo capacity further, they adapted structural parts from a retired WWII bomber, constructing a bulbous upper fuselage that widened the body to 6 meters in diameter. This creation? They named it Guppy, likely because of its fish-like appearance. The aircraft also earned the nickname Pregnant Guppy due to its comically expanded belly. Incredibly, Conroy and Aerospace Lines built this entire thing without NASA's input. The project was entirely self-funded. As the build went on, Conroy mortgaged everything he owned, his home, his car, even his furniture, burying himself in debt. He had bet it all on this one chance. By the time the aircraft was finished, Conroy was so broke he had to borrow fuel just to fly the Guppy from Los Angeles to Houston for a meeting with NASA representatives. If NASA rejected the idea, he wouldn't even have enough money to get home. In that case, he'd likely end up thumbing a ride back to California and straight into financial ruin. When air traffic controllers saw this stitched-together beast line up for takeoff, they were so convinced it would crash that they preemptively notified emergency responders. But the Guppy didn't crash. It flew, and flew beautifully. The only downside to its dramatic redesign was a loss in speed due to the added drag from the massive body. Upon its arrival in Houston, the Guppy left NASA engineers stunned. They hadn't believed such an odd-looking aircraft could actually become airborne. But after Conroy invited Wernher von Braun, NASA's lead rocket engineer, aboard for a test flight, the skeptics became believers. Von Braun was convinced this strange plane could give America a competitive edge in the space race. With von Braun's endorsement, NASA signed a deal, and Aerospace Lines had officially made it. Von Braun would later describe the Guppy as the most critical piece of equipment used in getting humans to the moon during the 1960s. So, how exactly did this bizarre aircraft function? To load cargo, the entire rear portion of the plane had to be physically unbolted and rolled back, essentially splitting the plane in two. The rocket stage was then slid into the hollow fuselage, and the two halves reattached. But this early Guppy was still an improvised design cobbled together from retired aircraft. It lacked key features that NASA required. For one, the cargo hold couldn't be pressurized, a major flaw, especially for delicate components sensitive to atmospheric changes. And worse still, it wasn't large enough to carry the massive third stage of the Saturn V. So, Conroy and his team went back to the drawing board and built something bigger, the Super Guppy. Still a patchwork of multiple planes, the Super Guppy started with a military cargo aircraft as its base instead of a passenger jet. They sawed it in two, added 10 more meters to its length, and crafted a much larger fuselage on top. This new body expanded the aircraft's width to 7.6 meters. The cargo bay was now fully pressurized and could swing open like a giant book, allowing for far easier loading and unloading. The process of loading and unloading the Super Guppy quickly became routine as it was assigned to the vital task of flying Saturn V parts from California and Alabama straight to Cape Canaveral. What once took 20 days by sea transport could now be accomplished in under 20 hours by air, a revolutionary improvement. This time-saving shift was essential, enabling NASA to accelerate the production and assembly of their massive fleet of moon-bound rockets. Without the Guppy, delays could have set NASA's schedule back by months or even years. There's a real possibility that without this aircraft, the Apollo missions might never have launched at all. In that case, the Soviet Union might have kept advancing and potentially been the first to send humans to the moon. Then, in November 1967, history was made as the very first Saturn V launched from Kennedy Space Center. Just 2 years later, in July 1969, that same rocket would carry the Apollo 11 crew to the lunar surface, marking mankind's first steps on another world. John Conroy, the mastermind behind the Guppy, wasn't around to enjoy the long-lasting glory of the moon landing. In 1967, the same year the Saturn V first flew, Conroy sold his stake in Aerospace Lines and moved on to launch his next venture, Conroy Aircraft. There, he continued his passion for ambitious aviation projects, developing wild new machines like the Sky Monster cargo plane and the Albatross amphibious flying boat. Sadly, Conroy's career was cut short. He was diagnosed with colon cancer and passed away at just 58 years old. But the legacy he left behind, embodied in the Guppy, has endured far beyond his lifetime. The Guppy aircraft continued serving NASA and advancing human space exploration for decades. In the mid-1970s, NASA used the Super Guppy to help construct its very first space station, Skylab. By the 1990s, the aircraft was being flown to move American-built modules for the International Space Station. And today, as NASA sets its sights back on the moon, reigniting the space race in the 21st century, the Guppy remains as relevant as ever. It continues to be a crucial part of the agency's logistics team, ferrying pieces of the Orion spacecraft and SLS rocket from coast to coast across the United States.